student. And then in about 5 minutes, we'll have you reverse roles so that you can practice the skill. If you have any time as I'm coming around the room, you have any questions, please just let me know and I'll be glad to help you. At this time, I'd be circulating around the room, making sure that students are implementing the strategy appropriately, seeing if they have any questions. If they're not using it correctly, I would intervene right at that moment so that they learn the correct method and have had a chance to practice it before they go back into a practicum setting. At this time, does anybody have any questions about the administration? It looks like that most people are understanding what to do and how to administer it. Can anybody think of a way how this tool would be effective in their classroom? And then I take feedback from students, how they would use it, what things they may learn, trying to go back over the information that I've already provided, and that this is a really good tool to get a lot of information from in just one simple test. The next thing we're going to go over is making words. And making words are multi-level lessons. The lessons meet the instructional needs of all students. The lessons are explicit and systematic. They teach students to look for patterns in words. They continue to support learners beyond the initial instruction. Students are actively engaged in the learning process. My students loved this when I did this because it is a very hands-on thing. It does meet students at from your beginning readers to those that excel, and the movement piece is particularly enticing to them. So in your packet, if you would take out, I have a making worksheet, and I left scissors on your table. What you're going to do, and your students would do, is they would get this sheet. You would take and cut right along the line. You can see I have the letters on here, D, P, R, S, S, E, I. And I tell them this is a word. It's an unknown word, and they have to try to guess what it is. So that's the challenge. At the very end, they have to try to uncode what the secret word is. So the first thing I would do is I'd start with a small word, and I would tell the students, this word is 3 letters long. The word is red. After that, I would have a student come up and I would have them manipulate the letters. Red. Okay. The next thing I would have students do is I would have them clap, chant, and write. We did all kinds of crazy things, but one of the things they love to do is they love to get up and move. So, for example, a student would come up, we do red, red, R-E-D, red, red, R-E-D, red, and that's just a real simple one. We would throw balls, we would shoot hoops, and for each letter, so R, E, D, red, and then we'd pretend we were dribbling. All kinds of movements that could go with this activity. The next thing we would do is we'd either put it in a pocket chart and the students would write it down. So we are going to change the word now from red to rid. And I'd say all you have to do is move one letter. And so they get kind of excited. Rid, rid. What letter would we have to move to change the word red to rid? Once again, I select a student. I usually had popsicle sticks, and I would pull out a popsicle stick and ask the child to come up and change it. So they would come up and change it to rid. We once again would either clap, chant, and then write it. So also another example we would do is like an Orton Gillingham, where we would do R-I-D, rid, R-I-D, rid. So there's a motion going along with the word. Then we would write it down, rid. As we continue through, we increase the difficulty of how to create the words. So the next example would be ride. Ride is a 4-letter word. You need 4 letters to change the word from rid to ride. What would you do? Once again, have a student come up and model, clap, chant, and write. We would continue to go through this till we got to the very end, where I would say to students, okay, now we need to figure out, using all of our letters, what's the magic word. At this time, students would start kind of moving them around, trying to figure out what the magic word for today is. If I see they're struggling, I start, and I will give them the initial letter. It starts with an S. You see some more students start S. And then you'll start to see some light bulbs click and they will get the word. If they continue to have difficulty, I continue to give letters. But this is a great opportunity, especially for those students that are doing above and beyond. They're initially the ones that get it first. When they're done and I've checked it, I have them put it to the side so the other students still have a chance to figure it out on their own. What I'd like you to do is I've included the script for another Making Word lesson. I'd like you to practice it with your neighbor. Each taking turns, one person teaching the lesson, one person being the student, and then reverse. When time's up, I'll give you a signal so that you know we're ready to move on to the next step. During this time, once again, I would walk around helping students, making sure that they're modeling it correctly, seeing if they have any questions, listening for what insights they might have to share, like how they would see it fitting in with what they're already doing, what students they think it might benefit, making sure that they understand that this is a lesson that is multi-level. It meets the needs of your beginning student and your high flyer. I also would let them know in the packet that I have created for them, the handouts, that it has all the instructions, so that when they do go to practice this, they can go back, look at it, review it before trying it in the classroom. Then I would pull them back together. We would have some discussion about how it went, what worked, what they feel comfortable with, what we may need to work on. And then I'd go on to the last strategy. And the last strategy for today is called Guess the Covered Word. And Guess the Covered Word are also, they meet the needs of a range of students. They deal with phonics knowledge, the placement of covered words in a sentence, and the sentence versus paragraph, and how to use the word for context. So, Guess the Covered Word is a reading strategy that is systematic and comprehensive in nature. It encourages students to use cross-checking skills, both the context clues and word analysis to decode unknown words. This strategy teaches students to look at have three basic questions when confronting a new word. What makes sense? How long is the word? How does the word begin? And what other letters are in the word? I would have this prepared. It's just a brief paragraph. You can write 4 or 5 sentences on the board. If I was doing plants, I might pick this one in particular to go along with a science unit that I created. What you want to do is you're going to cover up the word, and then students are going to share what they think possible words are that go into the block. For example, Sarah plowed the soil and blinked the seeds. I'd ask students, what word do you think will go in there? So Sarah plowed the soil and planted. Well, that makes sense. What other words? Sarah plowed the soil and watered the seeds. Okay? So watered. Sarah plowed the soil and tilled the seeds. Once you have those written down, what you're going to do is have students look at those, and do they make sense? Yes, those do make sense. So let's look at the initial letter. Oh, it starts with S. Do any of our words start with S? No, they don't. So let's think of what other words there might be that start with S. Sarah plowed the soil and students will come up with different answers. Sarah plowed the soil and spoiled. And they come up with some unusual things sometimes, so we have to talk about, well, does that make sense? Does Sarah plow the soil and spoil the seeds? That doesn't make sense, so that's not something that we're going to use. Oh, it's got a O. Sowed. Sowed is the word. And I'd go through this and have them actually go through, and I'd have students in the class share different things that they thought would go in there. Sarah plowed the soil and sowed the seeds. We continue on. Sunshine and rain help the blank to grow. Now let's think about that. Plants. Another student might say trees. Another might say flowers. Once again, we're going to look at that initial sound, and it is, we do it to the vowel, PL. So, which one of these makes sense? All the students are, ooh, plants. And that's correct. At this time, I have in the packet a practice sheet so that the students could go over it. I would go around the room and check how they're doing. This time I'm going to eavesdrop on them. And at the end of that, I would share some of the information that I overheard them saying. For example, I can see this really working with my students who are having trouble with initial sounds. Or I can see this being beneficial to those students who aren't reading through the word, they're just using the initial sound. Or I heard somebody say that they think this would be a great skill for students to think, does this make sense? Before the students leave, one of the things I would like them to do is to give me feedback, because their feedback helps to drive my instruction and see what they know, what they may not have gotten, and what they wish they knew more about. So I have an index card, and I would like them to write down 3 things that they learned, 2 things they'd like to know more about, and 1 thing they're still struggling with. That way, at the end, I'd collect that as a ticket out the door, and I'd say, this is a strategy I used with my students when exiting, and it gives you a lot of insight on an individual basis and what we need to know as a group, what we're feeling comfortable with, and what I need to do to help you feel prepared in the areas that you're struggling with. So, at this time, I'd like to thank you for viewing my presentation, and leave you with this. If all else fails, keep smiling. The internet ate my download, and unfortunately, that's very true of what happened yesterday. I did this presentation and had to do an update, and the internet ate my download. So I'm just going to keep smiling, and I appreciate once again your time. Thank you so much.